So we're here to take a closer look at this thing called AI today. So we all know about it. We all talk about it. Can't get away from it. But today we're going to try and find some different perspectives to bring to the conversation. And to start with that, I think it's important that we start where we're all at, which is marketing, right? So AI for marketing is an exciting thing, isn't it? It is an exciting thing. It's promising so many things. It's promising scale, efficiency, personalization. It's cool, makes life easier, makes life better. We hope that it protects our jobs. So it's cool. It's marketing as the algorithm. It's the ability to automate and optimize and deliver individually in the places that we all speak to consumers on that personal basis, in apps, in social, in email, in all of those sorts of channels. So it's a clear advantage for us as brands. But it's also not a competitive advantage because everyone's doing that too. And whilst that's happening, what's breakthrough technology today will basically feel like marketing as normal very quickly. And so while this is a great opportunity for us, it's not enough for brands. So in this recent report by WARC called the Multiplier Effect, they stated, and I'm quoting, shifting budget out of equity-led marketing into performance techniques may be superficially attractive, but leads to diminishing returns. So they're basically saying that there's a performance penalty for over-investing in pure performance marketing alone, and that CMOs should be investing circa 30% into equity-building brand activity as well. They cite Nike as one of the examples where they've seen a downturn in their performance because of that overcommitment into performance. So ultimately, it's pretty obvious because if you're trying to convert someone for a sale in the end of the funnel, if people aren't interested in that brand in the first place, they're not going to get there. So it's a demand issue. It's a top of funnel challenge. And this makes things harder for brands because that very top of funnel is being disrupted. So social channels are filling up with AI slop, circa 50%, apparently, certain sources are saying. And it's diluting their dominance as an authentic and trusted source of entertainment and information for those users. And the way we find things is changing as well. So obviously there's been huge growth in companies like Profound and Evertune who are filling that void to try and help brands influence consumers in LLM visibility. So the new sort of search, if you will, that's displacing things like Google. So what's a brand to do? Well, for every trend, there's a counter trend. And our relationships with technology is changing. So we know that we're spending more time with technology than ever. I think the stat, this is an interesting stat actually. It's something like 6 hours a day on average for 18 to 24-year-olds spent on devices. And you sort of hear that, you think 6 hours a day. And I think, Jesus, I'm going to spend like 10 hours a day on my laptop alone. So actually, I think the figures are probably conservative at that level. But the net is that we're distanced from real people and becoming more connected to AI. In this recent report by Meltwater, their Digital Trends 2026 that came out in October, the top 3 reasons for using their AI relationships were therapy and companionship, organizing my life, finding purpose. So I think what this really starts to say is that we're turning to AI to ask how to be more human, which is kind of an interesting concept in its own right. And for many, this is giving us a sense, a deepening sense that something fundamental is missing in our lives. And I think this writer who may or may not know Freya India, who's sort of a spokesperson for Gen Z, probably puts it in terms better than I can. So I'll hand it over to Freya.
If you think about the only world we've ever known, it's been a world where we can pretty much have everything we want without any human interaction. You know, we've got delivery apps, we've got dating apps, we've got self-service checkouts, we've got online communities, we've got online porn, we've got online lectures. This is a world where we don't need to interact with anyone or have any unplanned encounters. And it's a really tragic world. And I can't get across how little familiarity young people have with any sense of community. This idea that online communities are a lifeline is just a joke to me. I think it's a real indictment of modern society that we think that they're a lifeline. There's no such thing as an online community. It's a complete oxymoron. If you look now at the state of Gen Z and how lonely young people are, we could see that this promise that the internet was going to connect us was a complete lie. I mean, 3/4 of UK children spend more time inside than prison inmates. Young people are saying they're lonelier than pensioners now. So I think it's a real tragedy that we've lost this spontaneous interaction. And I think if you think about Gen Z, we've never known any different. We've never known flirting before it became sending an Instagram DM to someone. We've never known falling in love before it was swiping on dating apps. We've never known a world without obsessively documenting and editing and performing yourself as you go. And I think obviously we're struggling with our mental health now, because those unplanned encounters in communities and with people are crucial to mental health, and we've completely lost them.
So it's ironic, perhaps, that the very technologies designed to bring us together seem to be keeping us apart. And this is contributing to a growing tension, a sort of a craving for human connection and shared experiences. It's probably why nostalgia never seems to get old, why it's such a popular term in culture and why it's such a focus, especially with young people. And it's not a fad. It continues to grow year on year. Each year, people saying we've reached peak nostalgia, but it's a kind of pervasive force at this point. Secondly, it's also the reason that we're looking towards locals and communities and starting to try and reconnect in different means and different levels. And it's interesting that some of the biggest global brands are realizing that their role isn't to be big and global, it's to be representative of community and local, but knitted together at scale.
Idea of a creator and influencer in every zip code. You have big cut through creativity that people are engaging with on social. And then you've got local relevant community leaders. It's like the old word of mouth, if you will, that are making that content relevant for the customized communities and audiences.
Thank you. It's also why we're seeing such a shift in spend into local and experiential. So the spend is rising as a reaction for consumer demand for shared and lived experiences. And finally, it's also the reason that Nuevo is here, to bring us together locally, but everywhere, and connect as an ecosystem, as a single point of connection that brands can then build solutions around them to scale capabilities all over the world. Our ecosystem works by creating one team that acts as a curator to many.
Faster, more efficient, and more tuned to the way marketing works today. If we look deeply into what people care about and really need, we can help brands make a connection.
Nuevo has 3 core competencies that provide the engine for developing brand activation. They provide distinctive offerings in their own right, but combine to drive the full end-to-end creative ecosystem.
Creative Intelligence at Nuevo functions very much like a think tank, using AI as a baseline, but going further through primary research and expert guidance from our in-house specialist research talent and our wider global network of experts to generate net new knowledge with real rigor and qualitative texture. So we focus on using mixed methods insight informed by behavioral science, psychology, semiotics, foresight, design thinking, and anthropology to really deeply understand people. So basically, you can think of us as your direct line to the people that you're trying to reach on the ground.
Creative intelligence, which is very much our focus today, is the sort of first part of the 3 competencies that we have at Nuevo, the second being more the innovation and strategy and ideation, and then the final part of that, the creative messaging and concepting that brings these activations to life. But that's just to give you a bit of a snapshot in terms of like where we're focused, why we exist, and how we're here today. So now I want to bring it back to the core conversation of today. And one of our guys put this little sort of Gen AI loop together for us just to kind of capture what we feel is probably the essence of the relationship that we have as humans with technology and AI right now. It's sort of like sibling rivalry. There's this kind of push and pull going on as to kind of who's in charge and who calls the shots. And so I think today is going to be a really interesting discussion to kind of unpack that and explore where we feel it's going.
Thank you. Hi, gang.
So pleased to have you here.
Lovely to be here.
Well, I guess we can start with the fact that you really pioneered a lot of social media marketing before it was really even a thing. And we are sort of now at this new inflection point where there's another emerging technology that's disrupting communities. What parallels do you see between what was happening then and what's happening now?
Thank you. Gosh, lots. I mean, for starters, I feel like I carry guilt because of all of that, which maybe sounds absurd, 'cause it's not like I'm really responsible. But in our tiny way, I think it's just, and maybe a couple of you might be nearly as old as me, but because we've been a part of it from inception and have lived all the way through it to now. So so launching TV shows for terrestrial broadcasters here like Channel 4, Skins and The Phone Jacker and In-Betweeners, and it was really fun. And social media then was about, it was quite hard to recall, but really messy connection. Like, there wasn't anything monetized, optimized. You never used the word algorithm. That barely existed. Like, it genuinely was an opportunity for us to build a fan club. We modeled it. The reason we were pioneering was we ripped off the old music industry fan club model that had frankly been around since the 50s and used it within broadcasting. And something called MySpace existed, so we thought, oh, wicked, we can get a whole bunch of people on here talking about something before it's even out. And guess what? They can talk to one another. And those people can act in an individual way and paper their MySpace kind of areas like you would put posters up on a bedroom wall. This feels so long ago describing it like that now. And it's hard to recall before that just sheer weight of what it became. So I guess the reason I'm giving that bit of backstory is it was really exciting, and exciting in a way that right now is. So there are very obvious parallels in that respect. But we know what happened. We know what it's become. And it's pretty hard to handle. And it's a strange one, right? Because I suspect everyone in this room uses it. I do. I still find myself scrolling on Insta and sticking up something on stories when I've done a talk like this, I probably will later. Or, LinkedIn's like the new Facebook. I mean, it's insane. So it's almost like a necessary evil, dare I say. And I work with brands, I consult with brands all the time, and it's not like you can just go, hey, and we're not going to have any part of this on social. You may as well just say we're closing up. So it's a very strange relationship that currently exists. But the excitement that pervaded all of those times is definitely here now with AI. There are unbelievably big differences, I think, because social really came at a time where, I started working in this whole thing in 1999, right? This again showing my age. Holler, my first agency, I started in 2001, but in 99 I was working on Charlotte Street up the road at a digital agency called Zinc, and we were building websites. But honestly, was anyone really on them? It was like beans.com and these things that were just, they were almost like these strange new world artifacts, but super clunky, and you'd look at it on your dial-up. But it basically took almost a decade, I think, for us to really get to grips with that era, really until smartphones and smartphone kind of economics and buying stuff on an iPhone, really in the early and bit of kind of mid-level social media before it all kicked off. And the reason I'm saying that is it's a 10-year lag. There's no 10-year lag now. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is a relentless pace, like minute by minute. And I'm sure many of you subscribe to a whole bunch of feeds in AI, and you're doing a brilliant job curating this kind of conversation for good so that we can all kind of learn and dig in. But it is borderline impossible to keep up.
So fast.
And there come risks with that. Now, we walked into one unbelievable amount of risk with social media. It's led to, all sorts of issues from teen suicide, let's be honest, right the way through to anxiety and the mental health stuff. And this presentation that was just kind of given, I could have written, it was brilliant. And that Gen Z kind of, Jesus Christ, that was a knowing kind of diatribe of where we exist, right? So I guess I'm saying everything with this feeling of, I bloody hope we learn. I hope we can marry that excitement with what it can be and what it should be versus what it became.
Yeah, I mean, the pace of change is so fast now. From all of your time working in youth culture, do you feel that AI is already changing the way that young people are interacting with brands?
Yeah, definitely. Listen, and I hope I'm not today just a walking set of contradictions. I sort of feel like I am, where I continually wrestle with this subject, and there's parent in me to a 16-year-old boy, personal excitement with working with brands and furthering kind of marketing and comms and understanding what I do. But I almost feel there's this continual yin and yang. So we'll see where we get. Listen, on a hopeful way, I think it's what's really interesting, let's say for the way young people are dealing with it right now. I look at my son. I think there's an awful lot of agency that they're getting back and ownership. You know, as per that wicked piece of video, they have been dealt a pretty dodgy hand by all of us. I feel terrible. You know, they're like, really? This is what you've left us? You know, whether it be politically, they've gone from Boris Johnson, through to 2 terms of Trump. And a climate emergency that I knew about when I was 7 years old in my primary school that you appear to have completely ignored, and you're basically now saying is left to us. And now you're saying no one's got any money, jobs don't exist, there's a cost of living crisis, I can't buy a house, and AI's taking over the world.
Tough times. Really
So
tough times.
it's
guys.
really hard to be that age, I think. But what I particularly like when you're starting to see the way they interface with it, typically more advanced immediately at SONA, is agency, a return to agency, a complete empowerment, a real fluency. And it kind of started in a slightly worrying way a few years ago when they were very demanding with Alexa. and I'd be terribly polite. But I think that's turning into an expected understanding of you are here to help me. It's like another limb. And I like that because that return to agency, I feel like they require in a world that tried its best to remove it. So I think that feeling of ownership and authorship and being an originator again, fills me with hope.
Ooh, that's a really interesting thing you said there about agency. Do you think that CMOs are getting this shift wrong? Because it seems as though the conversation is just always about the way that AI is going to empower brands. They're not really talking about how it's empowering people.
I think that's exactly right. And I think that's one of the most hopeful and exciting parts. And you would assume CMOs would tune into that. I mean, if you look at things like Cannes Lion, right? When you go there in the last few years, everyone's on the beaches going, yeah, you know, we're using AI, fantastic. They sort of, even this summer when you're there, everyone's like, yeah, we're all over AI and it's great for efficiencies. Everything's about reducing down and distilling, and we don't need that anymore. Fantastic. And this is super efficient. We're going to save some money here. It's all about savings and efficiencies. Whereas the moment it's kind of flipping that and it's autonomy and responsibility and agency, then it becomes more human and you get to do all that is good to be a human again. And if you push that and empower that and give that a greater platform, then invariably the stuff that we make and the things that we say will be better, rather than, as per the brilliant presentation and video before me, more trash, more slop. What we don't need is more clutter and noise. Jesus. Like, absolutely, we all do everything we can these days to sift through and, you know, dial that down and remove that bit of noise and try and find it. And that might be the best brand in the world putting out the greatest piece of televisual advertising tomorrow, and it will basically be gone in 48 hours because it can't compete in the noise of our streams, which is a great shame because it's great stuff. You know, we might come on to that on how to sort of better give things that opportunity to stand. But the more CMOs realize that this can be about agency and human agency and what it is to be human, and whether that be with giving that agency back to young people who desperately need it the most, then that feels very hopeful and positive.
Definitely. And I think on that idea of the sort of experience, the humanness, you know, people are having brand experiences sort of everywhere. They're on their phones, in their homes, in retail environments, shopping centers, etc., raves even now, you know, commodification of raves. What do you think are the cornerstones of good AI integration into brand experiences, either digital or in real life? Have you seen any good ones yet?
Definitely anything that doesn't just smooth it out to within an inch of its life and smooth out the edges and like, because I think what we're seeing, and again, I feel like I'm referencing loads to what was just said, but it's just such a good kind of 5 minutes that, but we desperately need everything that is tactile and touch and physical and friction and all those bits that have just got lost in our screens. you know, I don't know if it's coincidental or a reaction to, but in the last few years, you've seen this unbelievably significant shift where you could argue right now experiential agencies, for example, in this industry are really important, for example. I think they've reclaimed a space that it used to be, hey, and now we'll find a little bit of budget, we're going to do a stunt, and it's for an alcohol brand, and that's it. But now it's like you kind of need to have some kind of physical point, physical artifact to anchor the thing in the first place, to have something to go off. If it starts on screen and ends on screen, it's really hard, like I say. So, yeah, I work with like a sports retailer like JD used to be JD Sports, and they actually do more perhaps than you'd imagine for young people. They've got some wonderful stuff where 90% of people in management in JD stores actually started there on the shop floor as like 16-year-olds. They're really good at kind of growing young people and bringing them through businesses. But also they see their retail environments, the work that we're trying to do together, increasingly as like places of belonging where young people can see how other young people might look and feel a bit like them and see an identity and recognize it. And the recent opening of the Trafford Centre in Manchester that some of you might have even been to but would know about, rather than just a big space, it is the biggest, I think, JD in Europe or something like that, but you've got JB Customs, a corner where you can go and basically design your own sneakers and trainers and hack them. And, you know, it's often forgotten that, I think the stat is for young people, the assumption is everything would just be bought online, but 60% of those, I think, under 30, still need to go in store and have the physical product. So they will all search for it and compare and contrast and stick it on their Snapchat message to their mates or whatever that might be, but they still want to coalesce around it physically. So again, I think that example is how can then AI improve that experience even more? Stop shortcutting or distilling it down, like taking out human interface and moments of coming together and moments of connection and seeing someone who looks like you and people you might recognize from a screen who come into store, and that's the good stuff. Anything that has a physical connective tissue around it. Now AI can still underpin that. It can make those moments even better. It can take you to them quicker. It can allow you to find out more greater in depth around it, but stop trying to kind of shortcut it and allow the human bit to carry through.
Definitely, and kind of AI as this facilitator. And so when you're consulting brands on kind of these omni-channel of, being able to take, those digital experiences and have that, through the line work that takes them into retail spaces, how can we think about what that balance needs to be between AI-driven efficiency and, still being in the spaces and, having that local nuance that makes people actually care?
Your point there on local nuance, I think, is so big. And again, I know that was mentioned. Like, local nuance fills everything at the moment. It feels like... So AI is giving us this opportunity where, well, there's kind of no excuses in one hand. So, yeah, I started an agency when I was 23. And I'm 40-something now, I'm going to tell you. 40-something. But I've sort of always joked, / this is true, but said, God, I've never really been able to use Excel, I've never really been able to use a spreadsheet, but I've sold my business. But it's true, I haven't. But I don't think those jokey quips can exist anymore. Every single person can do everything a little bit. So what remains? And that kind of what remains becomes, I think, like, really important, both from a brand perspective, from a commercial perspective, in terms of what people do and what people make and what people see. Like, what else is there of that almost creative human condition? What do we expect from, from what people walk into in terms of a commercial experience or a brand experience? The physicality becomes everything. So I think, again, like we mentioned before, but you can't underestimate how the interrelationship works at the moment between physical and digital. Cassette sales are up 20%, I think it is. Vinyl sales are through the roof, like absolutely massive. You're getting magazines brought back. So when I keep talking about this need to anchor these ecosystems where people have something the feeling of like belonging and something to hold on to. So you've got that. And then going back to your question, how does it act on a local level? Like, local becomes so important. It's a bit like when we can all do a little bit. Well, I used to lie as an agency owner on the pitch to the brand, and they'll be like, can you do global? And I had like one person in the States, one person in Dubai with a dog, and I'll be like, yeah, global, we've got that licked. No question. Now, everyone can do global now, pretty much because of the tech and the AI that exists. Local's the real sweet spot, though. If you get, it's all about local accents, local nuances, local dialects, and it's happening. I work a lot in culture. It's happening in this country, for example, in music at the moment. You know, in indie bands around the UK. There's a brilliant resurgence. They're not necessarily transcending and coming down to London, which I kind of like. It's very tribal. It's kind of like the away day football followings. You got like the Lathams in Wigan or Jamie Webster in Liverpool. They're very proudly from their area, speaking in their local accents, very much from that space, wearing it like football shirts. People like Sam Fender's a really big or obvious example in the Northeast. Like, it's a really important thing that people have that sense of pride. And again, that's kind of travel. You know, pride is that human condition, where you're from. You know, a lot of the work we do with JD, funnily enough, you know, some of the towns in northern towns and cities in the UK, and some of these young people are from fairly impoverished backgrounds that you speak to, and we're bringing on to various CSR programs, but, you know, their sense of pride is insane and just utterly compelling and infectious, and that comes through. So you can't just do a one-size-fits-all, and definitely shouldn't. It will be ruthlessly filtered out. I think we've never needed that local accent, local nuance in our work or in our comms more. And that, hopefully, with AI allowing us to be more global in a way that my business never could be, perhaps, in the way that I've just joked, well, maybe it's about really getting under the skin of these local places that becomes really important.
Definitely. I mean, there's this consumer demand for in real life experiences that we're seeing. You know, it's surging, especially as AI is dominating digital spaces. What do you think is driving this sort of hunger for tangible, physical moments?
I was saying the other day that I think almost like because I couldn't agree more. The KPI now is almost like goosebumps. I've got goosebumps now because I'm cold. It's a slightly different goosebump. Sorry, slightly shivering. But you know, you mentioned things like raves. Like, see, if you go back a few years, I hate ever talking about this. Sorry. So if you go back to COVID, lockdown, all of that nonsense. But my gosh, that beautiful craving for this again. And this is still really important. It's only a few years ago or 5 years ago, whatever it is now. But like it's still so important. And then do you remember how much we yearned for it and craved it? And people almost forgot what one another kind of looked like. And people, you know, my friend wrote a thing actually that I've sort of always remembered since, where he almost was like, I'm never saying no again to that opportunity for that sporting event or that music moment. And I've tried to live more that kind of piece where if it comes out, it's like, sod it. We have to do it. Now, I think, so we are definitely in that post-pandemic era that is crucial anyway. If you combine that with, you know, the greatest, remember, the biggest decline right now with the switching off of social apps, they've sort of felt like there's been one too many. It's not been with older people, it's been with the young. It's Gen Z, right? So it's a self-policing thing that's going on where people are thinking, I don't want to sit chained to this anymore. I want to go out and speak and see people or go to that rave or that event or whatever it might be. So again, yeah, my old lot, Defected Records, for example, you know, they're doing run clubs. It's a house music label. And people are running around the streets of London in their fluoro, you know, defected. But like TikTok aren't stupid. They have pop-up shops, physical places to come to. Snapchat's Vogue exhibition on Regent Street, you might remember. Gymshark is an online, you know, sports apparel retailer. You know, I thought it was a great example a few years ago where you go in there and if you're a kid, you can't afford gym membership, but you can go and rather an Apple Genius bar, it's a lift bar, and you learn how to bench, and it's the physical embodiment of the brand. So I think everyone is looking for ways they can act like that. How can we flip our brand inside out and give people something to touch and feel and be a part of something? So again, I think it's this almost confluence of things going on. There's so much noise and so much clutter that you need a place, maybe a place to go, a place of connection. You need something to stand out, so it can't just be something that's on social media, in our social feeds, something you can get an emotional, visceral reaction to. And people want those memories, you know. I talk a lot at the moment about, I just made the words up, but I think it's a thing, the aftermath economy. Like, I was working with Spotify recently, and I was sort of saying that, you know, you could argue they are partially responsible for. I've called it the sea of sameness. The Guardian called it the tyranny of the algorithm, where everything got a bit flatlined in culture. The music sounds the same, films sound the same, and it's a shame. And it's because we were all so time poor, apparently. We're all like, oh, For You pages, yeah, wicked. Amazon recommends because she said, you saw it, you want that too. Oh, yeah, wicked, but I've got no time, so yeah, I'll do that. And everything got really beige and vanilla, and Spotify radio and For You pages, and you know, Spotify Wrapped feels a bit like one of them. But I was talking with Spotify about everyone's always chasing the peak. I think a lot of brands are going to be now on the bit which is always about the memories. So look at last summer and Oasis and the brilliant kind of effect, I think, and people being on Gallagher Hill, trying to watch a tiny bit of Heaton Park in Manchester and listening to it and singing together. And the socials from that gathering on that hill arguably beat what was going on the concert. And it's the aftermath of an event. I used to work at Glitterbox, and you'd finish a Glitterbox event in Ibiza and the floor's covered in confetti and people are wide-eyed, not for those reasons, because they're loving what had gone on. But then it's about the playlist afterwards, that long drive home. It's like, that stuff is memories, and that stuff is emotion and feeling, and I think we are desperate for that. So building around that bit, I think we're going to see more and more of.
I think on that note, I mean, you've analyzed so many digital trends over the years. Are we at a bit of a risk of sort of over-rotating to the impact of AI and actually missing what people actually want or care about from brands?
Yeah. We sort of can't help but see this kind of speeding train of AI hitting us as it is, and I think people like everyone here are absolutely right to be unpacking it and desperate that we are doing what's right. And you're right, the trends, but there's kind of, I guess, macro and micro trends, right? And you'll know this better than me. This is literally what you do in a far more clever way. But this is bigger than the internet, so this one's a whopper. This is pretty seismic. This is electricity. But again, that's interesting. Even the use of language. I remember years ago, and I was in a not dissimilar scenario talking about mobile, and I was like, and I'd found this data, this kind of thing you'd find loads of, but it was like the historical use of the word railroad in the lexicon and in language, or prior to basically saying that you were traveling across the countryside on train. In other words, you always used to use the sentence, I'm going to use electricity to turn on the light. Or, we used to say at university, we are going to go on the internet now. Like it was a session that we were about to take part of, and I would troops down to our little lounge in the Midlands and turn on our massive desktop tower Mac and spend a session on the internet. Because you would. But AI is a bit like that. We're still using it in that way, but we're not going to. I mean, look at what Johnny Ive, I don't know, people here will probably know more than me. I assume what Johnny Ive's making with OpenAI is the equivalent of a thing that's sitting here and it's listening. Because at the moment, we are very restricted by keyboards and typing and thinking of prompts. But I'm suspecting that bit's going to disappear quite quickly. And voice, I don't know how many of you I'm like Alan Partridge, walking around quite a lot, speaking into my friendly GPT. It's as much note-taking as anything and decide right, which makes me look like an absolute idiot, but I'm assuming that's going to turn to listening. And then I think cognitively, and I'd love to know what people like Richard and that would say about this, I think it'd be far more aware, but what that does to that, I think, is interesting, because at the moment we're very constrained, constricted, and bound by typing. And so that feels very freeing, and hopefully liberating the right kind of thinking. Because that's surely the best bit. Going back hundreds of years, it was technology to make us more human is a lovely thing, i.e. not being constrained and bound by what we're having to do, which is so menial, in order to free up headspace to do better. I think we got lost in social media. It wasn't to do better. I'd love to think, it's actually going to free our imaginations more. That could be really hopeful.
That's a really interesting potential of AI as well. And I think if you were a CMO today, then thinking of that potential, and you were planning your 2025 to 2030 strat, what is one thing about AI's impact on brand building that you think you would be thinking about, and what do you think you'd be avoiding to avoid the sort of pitfalls of all the sort of how we sleptwalked into a few different issues with social media?
Such good questions. Like, well, for starters, I mean, I think saying 2030 is borderline impossible. People in here will be far brighter than me and perhaps have a better grasp of that. But I speak to brands a lot and say to look further than 12 months ahead is insane. And that's not, I don't think I'm avoiding the question, other than to plan beyond that is really tricky. You can set legacy, though, with intent. So if the brand's intent, and let's say it's working with young people over time and doing something with purpose, then of course that's an intent. But in a kind of classic comms way, you just don't know. The chances are the tech, comms, social landscape's going to look very, very different in about 18 months, let alone sort of 5 years. To the intimation of that question, I would love to think it's I mean, I hated what Sam Altman kind of came out with the other day, and there was that weird conversation which was effectively not ruling out kind of AI's use in pornography. And you're like, why is the headlines not about, do you know what, 50% of what we're doing is going to absolutely be about these cures in these medicines? Or like, why can't it be unbelievably galvanizing and uniting? I would desperately hope, but I'm not sure how much hope I have with the current figureheads at the top of the technologies, but you would desperately hope you go, that last 10 years looks fairly dodgy, utterly polemic, incredibly divisive, monetizing division, monetizing anxiety. Like, I'd love to think we go, let's do the next bit where we've got a climate emergency that needs solving, and this might give us a chance of solving it, which will free up these wonderful young brains. We can galvanize them in this way. Look at the way we can unite these pockets and factions of issues. Like, that would be wicked. Now, I don't believe half the people at the very top of the tree are going to do that. But I do believe people far lower, i.e. a bunch of CMOs that any of us might speak to on any given day at a bunch of good brands, perhaps could. And brands maybe do need to really step into that mantle. They've done it for years. Look at Nike's advertising with Colin Kaepernick or whatever, like, but Patagonia, like, there's a million examples. It doesn't even need that great a save the world grandiose purpose, but you can in your own lane. And I think people need that assistance. And if money exists, and if young people especially are saying they'll buy into a brand who is, frankly, as well as adding value to their life, doing something in a way that is important to them, and athletes and artists and talent are more culturally symbolic to young people than ever were before, well, all the stars align, actually. It's not like something that you have an allergic reaction to. You want people to step in and help. So I'd love to think CMOs can take on that mantle of responsibility and go, yeah, we'll get involved.
I mean, I love that. I think so often the conversation is about speed and efficiency, but we're losing that sense of, well, what is the cultural impact? You know, if we're going to be creating more, what is that more actually doing in culture? And I really love that as an
Absolutely.
idea.
Speed is just going to lead to more noise and clutter or slop, as was said earlier. Or we're just filling up these pipes that already exist, that no one needs to fill them up anymore. They are full enough. And we've got half the internet's already dead, like that whole dead internet thing. So how can we do more to free up imagination? And I'm sounding terribly worthy, I don't mean to, but, you know, doing things, even on its simplest way, how is it adding value, augmented the lives of people, young people? How is it helping? We were mentioning loneliness earlier. It's a huge thing. It's a massive thing. You know, it's massive. You know, I've just done some work with a football club, and it's about loneliness. It's epidemic proportions in this city, in London town. You know, things like football and sports, a wonderful thing for that, actually, and it solves that. Well, my goodness, I'm fairly sure some brilliant brands in and around AI can help there. Social media, ironically, was about connection at its best. And there were some good bits, because it helped certainly young people with social anxieties kind of be less anonymous and talk again for the first time. But the social part just got completely lost, and it's now this sort of strange broadcasting, relentlessness, kind of, supercharged algorithm. So I would love to think that there is a response to all of that that is within our grasp.
Do you think there are any trends or shifts then in the way that people are using AI? Like you mentioned, becoming more agentic, mentioned earlier on, that marketers are kind of blind to right now?
Yeah, the agentic thing is really interesting, isn't it? I'd love to know what this lot do as well. Do you use, because the stuff well, there's two bits. So yeah, come on, can we have a show of hands? Are we allowed to do that?
If anyone
So
wants to
show of
share.
hands, who's using it like for replacing stuff like, I don't know, nutrition or diet or personal training or gym routines or chef? Like, who uses AI in ways that's...
I do.
There we are, all of us. Basically everyone. So we're all doing it. Now, I don't know how public that stuff is or how publicly you discuss it. So one thing I think is really interesting, I was speaking to my mate yesterday, and he's like, I've had this idea, and it's like a banger. But he's just been working on it for ages with his GPT interface or whatever. Now, that stuff I like. It's like, I have a feeling we're all doing stuff, not in secret deliberately, but that's like our little mate. Or we're just having a little think about things. But rather than walking around talking to myself, which I do a bit of, you've at least got this thing that can talk back to you and you can refine these ideas. And I'm not sure that stuff that maybe it exists in some WhatsApp groups and little, Telegram chats or mini groups or you and a mate saying, I've had this thought. So I suspect there's a million little side hustles going on. I hate that phrase, side hustle. What's a better version? These ideas are getting oxygen. And perhaps before they weren't, for a million different reasons. Someone might not be very good at writing down ideas or articulating what's born in their brain and getting that down on paper or sticking a deck or storytelling or whatever. Now you can. Now that is really interesting. And so I definitely think that bit's forgot. That's like everyone's suddenly an entrepreneur if they want to be. There's a million business ideas, book ideas, thoughts, theatre productions. Like wicked, that's cool, isn't it? I'm not sure that stuff's coming to the surface yet when it's all about efficiency and we'll cut that bit out that used to take a squad of humans and we'll replace them with a bit, it'd be done in 5 seconds by a bot. So I think that's the bit that is nice. And I'd love to know what's going on in all those little dark social environments, like those little WhatsApp environments or just the one-to-ones. The one-to-one is my hope. I feel awful one and so if you will excuse me just for one more minute on this. So where I was so worried about AI being loads of slop and just filling the feeds and oh Christ, and what is it? Is it more AI agents than humans there's going to be this year? Was that the stat? Bloody hell, really? Is that good? Doesn't feel good. But then I spoke to a CMO friend of mine, a fashion guy, the other day, and he used to work for Alexander McQueen and he works for a huge retailer now, and I hadn't caught up with him for a while. But this guy is all about craft. We used to do this. He used to work for like Dunhill. He used to do these beautiful campaigns, all about the photography, and he was all over it. He goes, "Guys, great, isn't it?" I'm like, "Really?" Like, I really didn't expect his angle. And he said, "Yeah, it's." He said. And basically, the bit that I'm adopting from quite a lot that he said is the one-to-one nature of it, the co-pilot nature of it, the fact that we get to work with something that is quite literally kind of programmed to be better in understanding you every time you interface with it. So at its best, it should know you better than you know yourself. It should be beyond you version of a perception of you that is actually, your version of what you think you should be, but it's kind of how you feel they're seeing me. And is it even you? Like this AI, if we get this right, should be able to hone and work with you and know you intimately. And the more you think about that compared to, let's say, the last decade, which is all about averaging the community and aggregating the masses, then maybe that's returned to us as artists. And that's definitely been lost. And this idea of, remember that iconic picture of Picasso in his studio or Francis Bacon, it's covered in oil paint everywhere. And quite like that. Is it the return of the auteur and the mad artist and the Lee McQueen fashion designer? And because you are spending such time with one other, honing your harebrained, madcap, weirdo stuff, maybe that will end up somewhere really creatively exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, slightly too much. Great idea.
I was about to say, you can there are really good prompts to make AI crueler to you so that it gives you more objective opinions. It's
Yeah.
actually quite good. There's a good one. I'll give you.
Definitely need more of that.
So I guess for the brand leaders in the room today, so what is one concrete change that they could make to their approach this quarter based on how AI is reshaping brand activation?
Try and use it in a way that is not going to displace something a human's doing, but improve, elevate, or advance something that is human in what you're doing and what you're making and what that output is, if that makes sense. So it's not just a shortcut to replace, to save another few quid on the bottom line to, make the C-suite happy. And I know that it's easier said than done, but trying to push what it is to be human, because we desperately want that. That is pushing on an open door. Taste is everything right now. Taste is that absolute differentiator, bar none. History, knowing history. Sounds mental. But, look at what AI can't do right now. I'm not saying it won't be able to, but I watched that Paul Thomas Anderson movie, the Leo DiCaprio one battle after another. Have you seen it? AI can't do that. And the reason it can't do that yet, is the nuanced appreciation of history that you need to deliver culture right now, like mixing up 60s, 70s, early kind of revolutionary, Viva la Revolution kind of language, and putting it into that early use of sort of spectacle terrorism and baking it back into a kind of Leo DiCaprio, riff on his old world roles, bring it up to date with 3 decades of kind of music. You can't do that with a machine yet, but you do it with history. You need to know your history, your cultural nuance, your intimate understanding and cultural layers and music and film and creative appreciation. So all of that bit is vital. So protect what it is to be human at all costs, whoever you might be, brand leader, and push it harder rather than just seeking those efficiencies.
Well, that leads perfectly to my last question before we take some Q&A. So at the end of the day, great brands are ones that connect with people on that human level. As AI becomes more prevalent in the creative process, how do you see the role of human creativity evolving alongside AI and what AI will allow us to do?
Yeah, I guess hopefully it's that thing of us not, we became slavishly devoted to algorithms in the last decade. I'd love to think we can become genuine co-pilots with it. It has to feel hand in hand, hand in glove, however you describe it. It has to feel like collaboration, but that has our human sensibilities on the top. That humans are still the chef at the pass. That sprinkle and that garnish and that finesse and that excellence, and we have to be originators and have taste absolutely at the heart and human curation. And I was in a talk with someone else, and they were sort of saying it's really funny, and she was American. She said years ago, arts majors were kind of sneered at, and instead it was about being a fantastic lawyer, or but now like doing art history is potentially an amazing differentiator for young people, for example. And again, that's because what is it about us lot as humans that is special? Preserve it, look for it, create more of it in our teams, push it harder in our young people that we train and we work with, and then use AI to our advantage. And that's not just cutting corners, that is freeing our creativity and freeing our imagination and unifying us and uniting us. Jesus Christ, we need a bit of that at the moment, and perhaps doing some good too.
Impact. Thank you so much, James. This has been
Thank you.
such a great chat. But I think we have a few minutes to open up the floor to some questions. If anyone has any questions for James.
What do you think about live social engagement? Do you think it's something to pursue, or do you think it's something that's kind of getting...
What's the context?
So say you've got a live feed going on about a product and people are able to comment, engage. Do you think it's something that's dying, or do you think it's something that's engaging us more?
I think it's still really engaging. I think it's really engaging to to surprisingly young ages too, because of the way they've spent the last minimum 5 years in the likes of Twitch streams, gaming environments, so it's an expected part, if you like, of their growing up. And the reason I say that is therefore means it's probably future-proof for the next 5-10 years. Also, it's discourse, it's conversation, it's back and forth. You know, my slight critique of social that I might have given is because it's stopped being social broadly. You know, TikTok is the apex predator of all social media. And is it social at all, really? It's an amazing search tool. It's algorithmic rocket fuel. It will show me, it's beautifully engineered to keep me comatose, like, you know, worryingly gripped to it. It's incredible at that. I'm sticking it on a drip in me and I'm done. But what you're describing there is a far more a conversation. And it's taken me back to lockdown again, because we were doing these virtual events at Defected, and what we had this. There's a wicked DJ called Luke Solomon. He manages Honey DJ, and he's very famous. Comes from a lot of Detroit. Amazing guy, right? And he's very anti the virtual festival stuff that we did. We finally got him to do a performance on Twitch, and it was from the Defected Basement up the road, just down the corner actually, in Curtin Road. And the reason I'm saying this because it was blowing up. It was live on Twitch. I think they put it on their homepage. So it was live in North America, and it was like 5 o'clock in the afternoon here. And he was seeing tens of thousands of people responding as he was basically playing a set. And prior to that, he'd just recorded sets in a virtual way, and that's why he'd found it quite a sterile experience. And he came off, and he was buzzing. He said, that is exactly what the real thing's like. And he orientated his music and his set precisely to the ebb and flow of the comments and the emoticons and the emojis and the love he was getting. And basically, for him, it was like playing live for the first time probably in about 18 months at that moment because of lockdown. So the reason I say that is it's real. So a live social experience, as long as it's social in some way, is real. So I think that absolutely still has a place at the moment. Far greater a place, if you like, than just relentless pushing down the pipes of a broadcast like way.
Thank you. That's great.
Do we have any other questions for James? Oh, there we go.
Hiya. Really great talk. Thanks so much. It's so funny to hear that, you know, there was such a exciting kind of like blossoming at the beginning with your career, and you mentioning skins, and we're seeing a bit of a resurgence of skins appreciation online. Even across the pond, we're having like some American love for Effie, and this obviously ties back. Yeah, this ties back into all the kind of nostalgia stuff that you were talking about, and I think that kind of global, local harmony between the two is quite interesting. And kind of what is it about these cultural moments that feel very local, feels kind of very London and very rooted in that time, that is able to kind of transcend cultural barriers and be kind of picked up in places like America?
God, I love that question. I think more than anything, it's breaking the homogeny. Like, I love the thought of, that very British skins thing going across the pond full stop. I know there was an American version, but the fact that there's the appreciation of the original, as it were, I think that's particularly interesting. You can't underestimate, again, it was mentioned earlier, I thought in that brilliant talk before I started, was nostalgia is astonishing levels at the moment. I mean, it's just more and greater every year. And I agree, absolutely unsurprisingly, because people want to feel again. Now, they want to feel again because they remember a time when it felt different. And I guess that's the important thing. There's bad sides. No, I'm not going to say there's bad sides, wherever you sit politically. But there are sides to that have political consequences. You know, Make America Great Again is quite literally about, do you remember how it used to feel? We can make it feel like that again. Like, that was everything. The reaction to Jaguar was entirely around people felt that they owned this car. I hadn't sat in it. My rich mate's parents had one when I was 12, 13 years old. That was the last time I'd sat in a Jaguar. But they were vaguely therefore a part of my growing up, kind of a James Bond-like car, a thing that And a whole bunch of swathes of people thought they had ownership of this thing that they had never bought one for years. They couldn't give a toss. They didn't know that one barely a Jaguar sold in the preceding 24 months. And everyone went mad then that, how dare you take something that was mine? So nostalgia's everything. The latest John Lewis ad is basically, frankly, Dad's my age, going, oh, Christ. Now, the best thing about the new John Lewis ad, I think, is that TikTok and Reels and all of that is now full of parents dancing like they did in the 90s. Now, I love that.
So good.
And it's quite genuine. And you've got, like, mums in their pajamas and slippers putting on a pretty banging rave dance from, like, and I'm sure the kids are not thinking it. But all of that is feeling, isn't it? It is absolute just remembering what it was like. So even Skins was in the social media era, but it was 100% the beginning of it. And it was completely bloody different. And like I mentioned right at the start of this conversation, it was like fan clubs and we all had our personal spaces. And oh my God, we could talk to other people online at the first time. And, you know, you'd kind of evolve from MSN Messenger to this. And I'm going onto your page. Oh my God, you've made your page out of that. And it's like walking into your bedroom and you've got 5 tracks that are your tracks. And I wonder what my 5 tracks are going to be. And it was so exciting that we could connect on that level. And of course, the music from the time. Now, arguably, MySpace was one of the best platforms for music, by the way, that's forgotten that there ever was. Barely a social platform. It was an incredible place for music. And that was all about the music from the era and the noughties. And now music as well, you have a 20-year cycle. It's kind of just this weird, strange, known thing. That's why in the UK, you might have seen all the ads recently. It's like those EE ads with Block Party and the Klaxons. And it was all stuff from 20 years ago, right? And we just do this. But it's very nostalgic. So this is a very long-winded way of me saying I'm not surprised because of the nostalgia. The British, the love for what was, I think that's about breaking the homogeny and having something different and feeling there's something different that you can go to and that you can see and that you can buy into and that you can tap into, be it fashions from the time or music from the time too. But I love that it exists like that. And I bought a Skins print only the other day. So this whole timing is weird. So I don't just go around talking about Skins. I haven't talked about it for bloody years. But weirdly, I bought a print the other day that now sits on my little kitchen wall of the party that they did at the time because it feels nostalgic. It's 2 decades ago, so I guess it is.
Yeah, it's interesting that people are nostalgic for social networking now. Just like you mentioned, social media isn't particularly social anymore, but you know, MySpace was that different era of networking where you did actually feel like you were social. So yeah, no wonder people are nostalgic for it.
And you see it. I see my 16-year-old, all his mates. They're incredibly social in the morning. Like they are all Snapchat messages. But it's the least, I don't know if you've either closer to that age than me, or you have kids and you see it yourselves, but it is the least manicured, curated. It is him and his mates. You just see some of the photos they send each other. It's grotesque. Deliberately so, like awful, no style, lighting awful, just woke up, like mouth wide open, half yawning. They a deliberate, clear reaction to the Instagram culture, right? But it's immediately also a conduit of humor and fun and taking the mickey out of one another, of messaging and the relentlessness of their messaging back and forth and the scale of the group chats they have there. And it's incredibly social, but they just find their little part of social media that still is social because all the other bit isn't. They'll use that when they need it. But that's their bit that is. So we will always find it, I guess, as a species. Maybe not. Maybe the middle-aged crew, like, we'd lost it, and we're like, oh, it's a shame it's not social anymore.
Interesting. I think we can take one more question, if there are any more. Richard.
Hey, great talk. Just wanted to explore a little bit and understand your perspective on, I guess, the conversational aspects of brand experience and AI. Like you talked about Johnny Ive and these devices and us moving into a more kind of embodied space where all of a sudden we're going to have robots with personalities that are going to move around spaces effectively like proto-humans, right? Like, it's a pretty bold idea, but I don't think we're that far away from it, maybe 2 or 3 years. But like, what's your perspective on that? Just be interested to get your take.
I bloody love Richard's brain, by the way. We used to work together. Yeah, like, It's so hard, isn't it, when you say something like that, for us all not to get into something that just as humans makes us feel like, oh God, we're now onto a sci-fi one, right? And we will almost turn off. But you're right. I mean, we were almost there. So I don't even have the new AI browser. What was it called? Atlas? Was it Atlas? No. What's the open
Comet
AI?
is Perplexity.
But the
Atlas. Yeah.
It is Atlas, isn't it? I've not even really played with it. I don't know if you have or people do here. But the simplicity of now sending agents to do everything for you and connect those dots is basically also what you're saying. So you're you're right. It's not the near future. The manifestation of what physical form those things might take is different. But the connecting of the dots. So that's kind of why we're talking about. You're no longer on that prompt. This is the thing. Like, remember, AI, artificial intelligence of sorts, has been with us for quite some time now. But we were prompting in secret. We didn't know we were. Every micro decision and micro movement we all took for the last decade on every single big tech and social platform was underpinned by algorithms that ultimately is artificial intelligence, which has took us to where we are today. So our decisions have already been informed or influenced. We've already lived through it. It's only now in our friendly GPT interface. We're like, oh, great, this is working for me. It's like, all right, well, we've done a decade or so of where it's all gone wrong. But so we've been doing it in secret. Now we think we're in full control, and oh my God, they're saying really nice things to me, and this must be a great idea I've just come up with. And I'm pretty sure that next version, my friend actually had a very similar sort of idea, but this notion of the listener, this notion that this tiny device is sitting here in every room or a part of our apparel or on us, which again, when you first say it, like, oh God, is that weird? But then it makes perfect sense. So if you and me are going to have a coffee tomorrow, for example, and we're just having an hour's chat, the idea that that's beautifully surmised to you moments afterwards and say, oh, you were mentioning, I don't know why this is coming to my head, the Gumball Rally, and do you want me to start looking into that? And how did you see that working in with what you've been talking about? And I know you were talking with me with that brand. Do you want me to connect those dots? My God, that's going to feel powerful. The connecting of the dots worries me a little bit because, again, I bet you know more than me on the stats, or you probably definitely do, but people not working hard enough for the answers will worry me. The absolute reliance on the interface. I mean, didn't GPT go down a bit yesterday? Was it yesterday or the day before? You can imagine the speed. Like, my mate's a writer, inverted commas. And he's I'm not going to mention, he's a wicked journalist. He's like edited some of the biggest stuff in the world, and he's like, his output has doubled, of course, in the last 12 months. And he's like, yeah, I'd be lost again. Like, the speed with which, and that's the thing, it's becoming the internet, isn't it? It's going to become the gatekeeper. It's going to become our start point. Every browser session really is, you start with GPT. Does anyone really Google stuff now? Do you tend to use whatever, it's, you can't believe, even 12 months ago saying that, I think we were going, come on, Google Reflex, surely. But the speed with which that's kind of shifted. So I guess those bits, I think I have equal excitement and concern, because I think that's the bit that I think we all struggle to realize quite how quick this is and quite how much this is going to change. And again, the convenience of me speaking to that holiday trip being booked, to those items being sent, to the PA version of that agent solving that travel arrangement, to your mates being notified, to your holiday being booked. If all of this stuff exists frictionless, that's where I get a bit concerned. Because it feels a big old hope to go, so then you're just going to be left with your imagination and coming up with genius new ideas to save the world. Probably not. Left to your own devices. That bit. I feel like we need friction. And I feel like the last 2 years of people have just found that anyway. And that's why we're all reading mags again and going to raves and buying vinyl and buying record players this Christmas. And that is not coincidence. So you sort of feel like, I hope we just keep doing that to counterbalance whatever that is.
Awesome. Thank you so much, James.
Thank
It's
you
been
very, very
such a
much.
Great chat. How's everybody doing? Good? Warm enough?
Good.
Yeah, right?
We'll warm up soon, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I guess we've been speaking so much about what it means to be global and what it means to be local. And I guess it might be worthwhile at this point in the event as well just to think about what does it actually mean to be global now versus being local? What does that even really mean to brands now?
One of the ways that maybe in relation to AI that's relevant here is to think about how AI models understand that. I've been doing a lot of work with this notion of neural media, which is a kind of term that was coined by this theorist, K. Lauder McDowell, who like tries to frame AI in relation to a broader sort of I guess like understanding, kind of media understanding. So their claim is that from around 2010, we've moved into this neural media era away from a kind of network media. So a move from kind of social media as we kind of understood it into this kind of new kind of whatever era. And that also implies a kind of different way in which the model kind of understands and organizes things. So their claim is that sort of rather than a sort of a network and understanding things in the kind of network terms, which from around, I guess, like 1990 or so to around 2010, we kind of collectively kind of thought of things within kind of network and understanding. So neural media understands it much more in a kind of a multi-dimensional context. So within kind of AI models, there's a thing called embeddings. Embeddings are kind of any piece of collection of kind of data, I guess, or kind of content that has a whole set of different connections to other embeddings, and those embeddings are determined by kind of values of connections between them. What this means is that what seems like to us as something very kind of local or connected to us, maybe for the model, may be very, very distant. And what something that seems very distant from us maybe very close and maybe very local within a kind of this kind of model logic, and those kind of things that it can be connected to could be both another kind of user, or a piece of content, or a piece of advertising, kind of anything that the model kind of can kind of capture in some way. So I think that also means that actually not just a kind of distance thing, but also what we are actually kind of like local to or local with is also, we have to kind of potentially kind of rethink that in some way. So it's not just like we're locally here, we're human beings here, but we could also be like part of a local network that is including a whole set of things that we don't even really know about or are conscious of. So I think that sort of understanding of sort of, the kind of new understanding of what distances and what relationships or relations are within this kind of multi-dimensional dynamic or kind of system is, I think we need to start to think about that in some way.
Yeah, I love that. The actual technology itself is sort of just rewriting the paradigm on what it means to be global versus local.
I mean, I think also just the thing, I mean, I think like one of the terms that has been used to kind of understand this is more understanding it not necessarily in kind of like global, but as in kind of planetary. And I mean, you may have heard this kind of term of like planetary scale computation, but that's kind of like understanding that actually you maybe have a kind of local relationship with something on the other side of the world. So I think that's a kind of interesting way to kind of, I guess, like just to begin to understand it.
Yeah, I mean, that even comes to one of the questions that we had earlier, which is why is it that, American teens are nostalgic about skins, different time. But what's your take on global versus local, or if you want to bring anything in?
I think it's such an interesting time. I feel like big tech in a way has become almost, for some people, maybe not everyone, but for a lot of people, the enemy at the moment, because I think it is so scary, and there is a lot of, I think there's a lot to embrace, but I think there's also a lot to fear. Recently, we're hearing like there could be 20% of job loss, like this bloodbath of job loss that may be coming our way, and that, suicides from people going into ChatGPT psychosis. I think there is this whole other side that we like have to be aware of and address, and I think big tech has made global also feel very like homogenized and very flatlined, as the earlier speaker was talking about that as well, like the culture flatlining. So I think in, I guess, the horseshoe way of there's always a culture and then a counterculture, I think that pushes people to embrace locality and tangibility, and we kind of see that come to life really nicely with Rosalia's like recent album release of Lux, and how it's such high fidelity and it's so crafted and beautiful, and I think that's like part of these swings that we'll keep seeing, where people are pushed into more extremes. And that's also part of big tech's kind of MO, isn't it? That we're constantly polarized and constantly pushed into these two poles. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about global and local now. Maybe also because my work is partly with very global brands where we're trying to become as interconnected, as mass, as reach as possible. And then on the flip side, I work for Positive Retail, which is very local, very on the ground. It's a neighborhood community store, which is all about inviting people in and speaking to them and having local events, because there's so much beauty and importance in that. But yeah, I don't necessarily think that one is more powerful than the other. I think they both have their place. But I think we're in those interesting times where we're going to constantly see this horseshoe effect where we swing from one pole to the other.
Are you feeling that too, Ella?
Yes, and what it means to be global and local for me, it's interesting because we are, I think, at the end of the globalization era that we've known from the noughties, the 2010s. Global for me, I think, used to be a lot of resonance and reach, when now I think it has to be more resonance. It is also, you needed to be everywhere at the same time. When now I think you need to be more in touch, and the omni-channel paradigm is changing. I think also it was a lot about creating attention and reaching that attention, when now I think we need to be more intentional. So global with the help of local, and I think this is this intertwining relationship that they have, will have to be more meaningful. And the scaling of the messages will have to be the scaling of intention and meaning. So yeah, global and local being redefined at the moment like this.
I think one thing that you're all saying is that there's this sort of flattening happening here, both on the kind of surface and then even at the the very structural level, this sort of flattening of global and local. When we think of big global brands as well, is it a lot harder then for them to feel truly local in spaces when they're thinking about their strategies and how they actually interact with people? Is it harder now? Would you say it's harder, different, or?
I would say different. I think, again, partly driven by the climate that we're in and internet culture, everything is speeding up. So I feel like brands are also better at learning the game and the codes, and there's many of us helping them to do that as well. So I think they are able to create a full sense of intimacy. I think also at the same time, there's so many. The audience has never been more plugged into marketing and how marketing works and dissecting marketing. And even if we take the recent release of the Marty Supreme marketing with A24 and the Timothy Chalamet 18-minute video, that then gets dissected by all of these hot takes and TikTok takes on what was behind that and why did they do that. So I think people are so hyper aware of the marketing game that I think when brands are trying to do faux local, it can be taken as inauthentic. I don't think that means they shouldn't do it, because I think it's really important for brands to connect on a local level, and they have a lot of power that they can use to help communities and support communities. But yeah, I think people are a lot more discerning today.
I was thinking maybe the actual idea of having a kind of global position itself is a sort of an identity in a way that is as kind of relevant as having an incredibly kind of I guess local position as well. I guess in a way I'm thinking, going back to the thing about how these kind of models understand positioning, I think these different scales are any brand could operate simultaneously on an incredibly kind of planetary scale, but also on a local scale. and all the scales in between, and each one has its own characteristics and I guess capacities and sort of potentials and risks, I guess. And so I guess the kind of smart brands are the ones that are able to understand that, and I guess like have the team to be able to kind of respond to that in a kind of effective way. But it seems, yeah, that kind of being able to occupy different positions simultaneously, and that not feel in contradiction, feels like what smart brands should be doing, I guess.
Yeah, I guess contextually, when you think about it, we're seeing the rise of buy local movements, for instance, really driven by a lot of kind of economic nationalism. We see it sort of everywhere across the globe. Obviously, it's existed forever, but it's sort of, there's been these inflection points, let's say around tariffs and the like. What does it mean for global brands and global branded content when people are starting to also push away these larger corporations and say that they want, like they're looking into supply chains, for instance, and you know, the sort of thing that you wouldn't typically think, you know, a consumer would do. Like they're considerably more empowered to be able to, you know, take a look at these things, and they want things to be local. What's a global brand to do in an age of economic nationalism?
It's a very good question and important question. And I think this is where AI needs to be used in a very regulated or having, again, like James was saying, our human agency into that. So whatever can be made more efficient and frictionless to kind of free our creativity, and that sense of listening and participating and really engaging local communities is what is really going to be key. And to go back to your first questions about the redefinition of being local, it's no longer, and like what you were saying also, Daniel, it's no longer about just being in certain geographies at the same time and speaking their language roughly, but is really being local, is about understanding the emotions of humans and those little niches. And I think this is what the rise of local buying is about. Yes, it is about the geography, but also the history, the community, and all the consequences that trickle down from being local. And big corporations need to understand that, and it doesn't mean that it's mutually exclusive. And this is what would actually mean to be global for real nowadays.
Is by showing up with that sort of sense of connection to the local.
Yes, and that will bring all the more texture and all the more credibility, I think, and legitimacy to brands to really understand each and one of their consumers wherever they are. And for instance, using AI to collect that data is great, but as of now, I think we're very much data rich, but very much insight poor. So we need to learn. And AI is not only about doing or facilitating things, but how can we make sure that we really learn from our local intricacies?
One way to understand AI models is to think of it as principally a kind of like bureaucratic technology, rather than sort of like something that is able to kind of generate wonderful creative whatever outputs, but principally it's like really good at kind of organizing things in ways that are you know, beyond the scope of individual humans and maybe even kind of collective humans. So I think in something like that you can then think about it being used for, say, for instance, like infrastructural or supply chain. So things that are kind of like about the organization of certain kind of activities or processes. And I think the thing that I was thinking off the back of that is that the idea of building local models that are relatively kind of self-contained, rather than using kind of like big LLMs or like building kind of local models that are much more bespoke and much more designed for the members or whoever is kind of using that. So I think there is something interesting about this kind of like, even on the kind of the tech side of it, like thinking of certain kinds of structures or certain kinds of models as kind of locally built and locally kind of run. The other thing I was just thinking of was, and it's not really to do with AI, but just I think there is quite a useful or interesting blueprint was I've been recently doing some kind of research on the brand Telfar, and
love them.
Yeah,
So good.
kind of incredible. I mean, just really, really incredible brand. I mean, yeah. I mean, there'll be people writing about this about them. But I mean, like one of the things they won this prize back in 2017 or something like that, and they got something like $500,000 or something like that, and prize money, and they invested most of that in understanding their supply chain system and going over to China and working with manufacturers, et cetera, et cetera. When the pandemic hit, they were in a much better position to be able to kind of understand what was possible, what the timescales were, et cetera, so they could continue kind of working, I guess, or continue supplying their customers, et cetera. I think, but at the same time, so they have this incredibly kind of like incredible understanding of the kind of global systems, but at the same time, they're so embedded in kind of New York, and they present themselves, and they genuinely, you know, like are part of the city. So I think that's a kind of really interesting model in terms of how to kind of operate and understanding things like infrastructure as a fundamental part of the kind of creative operation. And I think increasingly with kind of using AI or embedding AI in systems, like, you know, creatives will have to think about that in those terms.
Yeah, Telfar is really interesting. So their pricing model as well, which was all around lowering the price when there was higher demand because the per unit cost was going to go up. So it was like actually using intelligent systems in supply chains
and I
for
think
egalitarianism and access, which is a beautiful sort of case study.
Yeah, and I think like building infrastructure so that they had some control over these systems. So, I mean, they were very clear, I think it's in 2020, they made this kind of like public announcement. They said, like, within a year, we want to be out of the fashion system. We don't want anything to do with the fashion system. We don't want to sell to wholesalers, anything. Like, we just want to create a system where we can sell directly to our customers, who we see as kind of our members, et cetera, et cetera. And so they build a system to do that. And now they have this Telfar TV, and they principally use that as their vehicle to communicate and kind of have a kind of relationship with their customers, members, etc. So they're not reliant on things like the big platforms. They still use the big platforms, fine, but they're not reliant on them, where previously they were reliant on Insta, etc., to sell stuff. And, you know, like Insta will like change the algorithm, and therefore, you know, like it prioritizes this rather than that, and then they're completely screwed. So like they were very kind of clear about the fact that they needed to build their own and have some kind of ownership of their infrastructure to be able to do the kinds of things that they do.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's just such an interesting in the light of what's currently happening across the industry, where AI is really accelerating content production. That, you know, when we talk about slop, right? You know, many clients or just, you know, brands all over are saying that they're going to use AI to accelerate global content production by like 300% and things like that. But that is the antithesis of what you're speaking about with Telfar, which is, you know, being very heritage and very story driven. You know, how is AI and slop culture changing the way that consumers are actually interacting with brands and branded content around the world?
At the moment, we're still in the very like early stages of brands using AI in that way, of like making lots of content for Instagram or for TikTok, like video-based content, because we're still in that moment where there's quite a lot of pushback on that. I'm sure that will continue to grow. In what way, I'm not too sure. I definitely don't think brands should be kind of trying to hop on the trends of like ballerina cappuccino or tung tung sahur. Like, I don't think that's going to land very well with the audience. But ultimately, I think most of the time for brands and for people, we're willing to let go of a lot of our values for convenience. And I think that's something that we'll naturally just start seeing bed in. But I'm not 100% sure what it will look like yet. I would hope and wish and rather that brands were using it in the way that you were just talking about, Daniel, where it's like, actually use it to do something really useful that like strengthens your brand and makes you more profitable and makes your brand more successful and still allows for loads of creativity. Like, use it on production lines and supply chains and all of those things, instead of making like a TikTok video, which, like, no one needs it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think at this point brands are still experimenting, And also because it's new to the human species, just to see how we react to that. And whether you are in contact with AI every day, like us professionals, or you work in that field, to actually our consumers, I really wonder if I actually think our eye as humans is trained to recognize what is fake. And for now, because even if these deep fake are really well done, there's still something that is sticky, and as human beings, from a reptilian point of view, we can still grasp and differentiate to get learnings into how we react, and then hopefully realign with human and humanity and humanness values to say, okay, we tested, but we're not going to pay with the prices of the cost of our values or what makes us who we are just for the sake of convenience. This is my hope. And when you look at examples of brands giving back, if we still are going to the supply chain kind of topic or even more, it pains me to say that I'm not a pro Starbucks, but they're really good at being a global brand. They're everywhere, even in China. And we know it's a very difficult territory to get in. But also, I think recently, back this summer, they opened their 50th community store. And I don't know if you're aware of that, but in terms of supply chain, they do ask for local furniture makers, ceramic makers, perhaps coffee producers, etc., to furnish their local store. Then also they do offer, with the profits that they have, training, CV, networking, skills kind of workshops for their employees so that can grow as well. And also it does help just bringing more life and enliven the neighborhood and the community. So at so many different levels, they manage to really understand what the challenges, the problems and the needs a local neighborhood needs. Then maybe there might be AI facilitating a few things, but even if there wasn't, it just shows that the humanity in understanding the local nuances, the flavors, is still really key.
That's such an important part of the kind of like ethical sort of planning around a business as well. And I led into my next question kind of perfectly, just about brand spaces. And knowing that like in real life is still one of the most important ways for brands to reach people. Even though we overstate digital realms, we're still shopping in stores, we're still in retail environments. And being in a place with people or getting their attention that way is so important for heritage and storytelling. What are some of the most interesting developments that you've seen in local brand storytelling, similar to what Ella just mentioned, on the ground?
Again, like Telfar opened their first store in New York recently. And I think what is interesting about the store is that they, I think it's for 3 or 4 days a week, it's a store. And then the other days of the week, it's used as a broadcasting studio.
Oh,
so
like
they
for
film,
creators.
So they film kind of content in there. So I think it is, and all of they're super, and so they also have this program, like series on a channel called New Models, where they are like recruiting kind of staff and whatever, and it's this whole kind of like performance thing, whatever. It's kind of amazing, like whatever. But I think for me that is a really interesting. That's an interesting, again, like model of like how you could use something like a store or some kind of space for these kind of multi-functional purposes. Thinking that, something like, certainly like within a fashion context, like, I think like fashion brands are principally like media platforms, right? So they sort of have to operate under those terms. And so like to think of a store as being not principally around just selling stuff. You can buy stuff or sell stuff there, but it's principally a kind of space to kind of activity or like to produce content or produce whatever. And I think like, recognizing that it's like using several days of the week as a kind of broadcasting studio is kind of amazing.
Maybe slightly less active of an example, but Gentle Monster's store in Seoul is like incredible. They with each release that they do, they kind of like reskin their socials, the store space, and it's super imaginative and like fantasy led. So there was it was a little while ago now, but Jennie from Blackpink did a partnership with them, and they had like these flying capybaras, and there was a huge unicorn, and their seeding and gifting packs came in a unicorn that you opened up, and it had all the glasses in. So I just think they like lean into that fantasy space really well. And if you're not going to go down like a bit more of a cultural community route, I think there's something quite like beautiful in just like leaning into pure like expression and play and giving people something that they can't really have in the everyday, like, yeah, just pure imagination and dreams.
I have a few more examples, whether RL or URL. So for physical retail spaces, not new, but I'm sure you're all familiar with the Samsung Center in King's Cross. And kind of taking the example from their different HQs in South Korea, it's not to buy anything, it's not to purchase. The staff is not even allowed to say, oh, we actually sell this for the price of. You're just here to touch, to test, to just even sit and have a coffee and just be immersed in the world. So that's one of them. But also to digital brands such as TikTok or Snapchat and all these kind of social media spaces, media platforms or brands are creating more and more events in real life. So that says a lot about people wanting to go back into a community feel, relationship, social, and really engaging. And then I had another one actually that is more going back to digital space and physical space as well. I think it was this summer, McDonald's, which lead us back to local being an emotion or a community. Let's say you take a niche such as anime or K-pop, or even on TikTok, Clean Talk, Book Talk, these kind of things. Basically, McDonald's understood that in Los Angeles, and globally, there's a huge anime community and this whole fandom. And for rights concerns, the mangas are not allowed to draw the McDonald's, the arches. So they reversed it and made it a W. So because they really made their research about what it means to be locally in terms of emotions and this fandom engagement, they created a campaign and then a pop-up store in LA with only a few reservations a day. So they create FOMO, but also this vibrancy and this engagement, this exclusivity. And then on their packaging, for instance, they recreated with the authors of different famous animes, very specific and limited editions manga stories. And then they would also iterate that and echo that across all of their digital spaces. And I think that was a good understanding of how local can be redefined or how local has different meanings now.
Someone like Blackpink, I think, are like a really good model for this kind of global and local thing.
Absolutely.
Like just in terms of like, you know, like you think of Blackpink and they are this global thing, entity, but then they are obviously also physical people, made up of physical people who like travel the world to very specific places that have their own kind of community and fan base. So I think something like, I think like K-pop is probably like a really, they're amazing in terms of like how it understands the world and whatever. But I think like something like Blackpink, I think is an interesting like model for, like how do you deal with this? Simultaneously kind of having a kind of global perspective or kind of scale and also sort of operating on a kind of local level as well. Like I heard like the other week, Jennie released like her own font. Kind of amazing.
It's kind of random.
It's such a machine, isn't it?
I know, and it's just like, like this like, I don't know. So for me, that's like kind of an amazing thing, like that someone on that scale can also, I'm sure she wasn't the font designer, whatever, but just like, okay, she just decides that she wants to produce a font and then she produces it. It's kind of amazing.
I think even just thinking about all the retail examples we've just spoken about and all the sort of like joy that we're getting in Gentle Monster or Telfar or, you know, McDonald's or Starbucks and all these different sort of places. I think what you're all speaking about is this, not just a feeling, but this sort of like the experience itself as being something that's sort of like highly intangible and instead kind of creating this jouissance, this sort of new experience. But where is AI in all of this? Like, is there a role for AI in these retail spaces that we think are meaningful? Because it's very easy to speak about AI in terms of content production and how it's going to accelerate creativity, but everything that we've spoken about is sort of, there's no AI in any of that, in these sort of like retail moments of pure joy. Where do we see AI starting to have a meaningful impact here?
There was actually with Gentle Monster when they did the Tekken collaboration. I think it was in store as well as online that you could go in and take a picture and then it would kind of like put you into the campaign. Whether you sort of consider that to even be AI technology or something else, but I think when it's used in that like hyper personalized way of like something a bit fun and playful, like maybe there's spaces within that of like within a retail experience it's built in so that you can be in the campaign or that you can feature in some way or you can go on a choose your own adventure style journey. Maybe something like that would be interesting.
One way to maybe think about it would be not necessarily in sort of producing, like I guess like visual outcomes or whatever piece of content, but more in, again, the sort of like facilitating the unique kind of relationships or unique kind of connections or groups. I was thinking of the Venice Architectural Biennale this year, the architectural studio Sub, who do all the amazing work for Balenciaga and a whole set of other people, but and set designs for. They designed this, I guess, like a guide of the Biennale, but it was. Rather than just kind of giving you a kind of like, okay, you're near this piece of work or whatever, it would try to understand how you're feeling through a set of prompts, etc., and then respond. It would give you kind of guidance based on that. So that, I mean, it's very crude to a certain degree, I guess, but like where it's leading to potentially is this a system that has some understanding about you and is trying to kind of respond to that in some way. And that could be based on purely like information that you give it in a kind of conscious way. But I mean, I guess once you then connect that with, say, like wearable tech, which is another aspect of this, which is kind of like increasingly technologies are being able to monitor your biological activities or and then kind of respond to that in a particular way. I mean, I could see things, in the future, very near future, where things are like suggesting things based on your biometric readings and kind of suggesting, oh, maybe you should go to have a coffee right now, or you need to go and do this, and then suggest things accordingly. So I think that maybe that would be one area that I think is interesting, obviously problematic in a lot of ways, but kind of interesting in terms of like what a kind of experience would be. So that way it would not be sort of like it producing like visual material as such, but more like shaping your kind of experience in a particular way.
Yeah. For me, it's not supposed to be consumer facing only or majorly. It should be what works in the background so that then human faces, beings, relationship, experience, engagement then come to the forefront. And then I think this is maybe what Coca-Cola was doing really well 2024 up to now. Within China, again, they used AI as the back office to enable people to share their faces. So in their city, in their street, in the neighborhood, it was their faces on the posters. So they had a campaign where basically they would choose fans across different countries, and they would have the chance to greet their favorite teams and the different players, no matter the countries they were in. And it was 18 countries, 15 languages. But then AI, I guess, had to be the translator and making sure that everything from the control room was neat and on point. But again, the back office, making the players and the fans shine.
And that's that point about really engaging communities. How should brands be? We're speaking about AI and efficiency and all of these other things, but at the core of what we really want to get to is how to make meaningful experiences for people. What should brands be doing to make these sort of meaningful experiences for people and communities?
I think they should look at consumers being beyond consumers. I think the concept of fan and fandom is really true nowadays, because you have this invisible yet such strong shared feeling of loyalty. You have the same rituals, you show up in the same places, in the same spaces, you share the same engagement and feelings. And so that is all the intangible stuff that we really need to tap into. Again, as local being the feelings, the humanity, the understanding, the emotions, the meaning, rather than just being the geography or something like that. So pushing that concept of consumers to fans with all that, the fire and the humanity and all its aspects that it really brings together.
There is a space for having kind of like developing relationships with these models in some way. Like, I guess, at least kind of to acknowledge that that is happening. And I'm not necessarily sure that we should resist it just on a kind of, I would think like a misguided sort of like moral position. I think like we form relationships with a whole set of artificial entities, like even or like develop parasocial relationships with like even human beings that we don't actually have any real sort of like actual kind of like like contact with as such. So I think in that sense, yeah, my senses would be that you could develop kind of genuine sort of local or genuine kind of relationships with entities, as much as it could be with other human beings. And I think maybe like, I think from a brand perspective, it would be to kind of acknowledge that, but do that with, I guess, like sincerity and some sort of, I guess like commitment to it. Yeah, I personally would feel that's what a brand could do.
It's like the Instagram bots, right, that you've seen where it's like sort of looks like Kylie Jenner. I'm sure that many of you have used those before, where it's just a random bot and, you can actually speak to them, but they're trying to get people used to speaking on social media again. So to those like, parasocial relationships, there are experiences that they're trying to kind of generate in these spaces.
And I've got lots of friends who like have, I mean, like say like relationships with their AI friends or whatever they would call it, that or therapists or whatever. I mean, and it's not like they know that it's an AI system. It's not like they're stupid, but they sort of recognize that that's the kind of dynamic of their relationship, right?
But like, is that in terms of meaningful experiences? Do you think that those experiences will be as strong as the other ones that they might be able to create? Like, do you feel like is AI overhyped, I guess, in these spaces when we start to think about the experiences that brands can give to their consumers?
Somewhere where I've seen it used really powerfully on the back end is working with one of the biggest global sports brands. We developed a way of being able to communicate with like thousands of their top runners or like kids on the ground that are playing basketball, and used it as a way to like tap into cultural insights that were able to feedback loop into the brand, but also then the brand was able to test like new campaigns that they had coming out or directions that they were taking, and able to kind of garner live feedback on a global scale and then segment that by a local us using the segmentation, we were able to then break down what does that mean for everyone locally, and then how should they operate and how should they behave. So I think that can be a very meaningful way of using it, like insights gathering, understanding, segmentation. They might not be the like sexiest things in the world, but they're actually very powerful and can make you able to connect in a really different way.
Yeah, definitely. I think question to all of you. What do you think is the most exciting part of AI's potential when we're specifically thinking about kind of retail and brand experiences?
I think for me it would be that it's able to, I guess, like surface relations and sort of patterns that are sort of unperceptible to kind of humans. And I think that for then that kind of enables potentially kind of interesting dynamics and relations to kind of emerge. But obviously that's a kind of a second step, I guess, after that. But I think this idea that actually it can actually perceive things and sort of understand things and build connections between things that are seemingly like disconnected or not related at all. I think there's something very interesting in that, and I think if used in a sensitive way, etc., and intelligent way, then the outcomes of that, or using that in order to produce experiences in whatever form, is possible. And I think that those experiences then would be genuinely interesting, meaningful experiences. The human is a major part of that. And, you know,
It's the human amplified.
Yeah, and like a creative team, etc., would be a major part of that. So it's not, I mean, it's absolutely not sort of like automating the whole thing and just assuming that like some AI system will just be able to generate a really interesting blah, blah, like film or advert or something. I mean, like, yeah, that's not that interesting, I don't think. But actually to think about it in terms of like, it's actually is able, again, almost like as this kind of like bureaucratic technology or this a kind of symbol generator, it's able to sort of like draw patterns or form patterns that are seemingly or not possible for us to perceive. But then once they've made it, we can kind of understand it. And, you know, that's how it's being used within sort of like scientific work and kind of, and so it's kind of a similar principle in that regard.
What shifts in digital culture, or really culture at large, do you think that we might actually just be overlooking with all of this chat about AI?
Just to be more human and to tap into so many things that we don't even know, understand, fathom, comprehend, or even imagine about ourselves and our capabilities. Because it feels like we're relying or trying to be too comfortable. And again, that's a very human evolution trait of I'm going to make myself very stay put, comfortable, but that's the riskier thing. And so we need to really be conscious about the fact that AI is this facilitator, this amplifier, this bureaucratic help. So again, we can really shine as human species.
Like podcasts as an example of, and I say this just because I think what maybe is interesting, something around, I'm not suggesting, the future is podcast. What, guys, listen, right? This thing called podcast. No, but what I think what is interesting about it is that I think one of the reasons why they are so popular, and they're increasingly seemingly popular, is that they provide a kind of form of, I guess, like companionship and kind of like shared meaning in some way. And so I think, like that's something maybe that can be overlooked especially in the kind of AI hype, is these things like forms or formats that facilitate things like companionship, and that could also doesn't necessarily have to be in a physical space it could also be over, like a recorded conversation between people. It can take multiple forms. But I think, something like that would be something that I think has been overlooked in the kind of AI hype, etc.
Oh, that's interesting, because I've been feeling and seeing and hearing something different about podcasts, that perhaps people are a bit saturated with it, and especially whether it's, if it's live podcast and you have real people interacting and you show the behind the scenes and everything, I think that's still great. But you have a lot of AI now tools that enable you to create podcasts. Let's say I put a presentation on Notebook LM, and then I want you to create a podcast, and I want an American woman and a French man to discuss that. I want the highlight points to be 1, 2, 3. Do me a 30-minute version and a 2-minute version. And it's incredible how human they sound. I don't know if you've, yeah.
Oh yeah, but I guess what I'd say was just be like, that would be, for me, that's like the equivalent of like saying, oh, you can produce a video using whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, sure, you can do it. And it can look realistic, I guess. But, you know, I was just thinking like, I listen to Biz's podcast. Like, the reason why I listen to it is because it's, you know, like I have some, again, like, I guess like parasocial-ish relationship with those, the three hosts who are having a conversation with each other, who are like sharing bits about their life, their, et cetera, and you sort of like feel part of it. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
that-
not
that
saying
fandom-
in principle that may be able to be done by an AI system for sure, maybe, but I think what I was thinking was that like what I think the value of something like that as a kind of format, etc., is this a kind of like shared sense of kind of meaning and understanding of the world with people that you feel some companionship or some
Yeah.
connection with
Yeah.
on some level, you know. And obviously that is if you're listening to someone on a podcast, you know, you're not friends with them in any meaningful way, but you do feel like you have some kind of like, like understanding of them and companionship on some level.
Yeah.
In an abstracted way, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that goes back, or that parallels the fandom concept that I was trying to put out there. Yeah, yeah, I
That
agree.
there's real kind of connection in there, and that's something AI can't touch yet, at least. What piece of advice would you give to brands that are here to keep in mind as they think about how to connect with culture and activate in real life?
I would suggest to think about the use of it infrastructurally and avoid the use of it for sort of convenience. Because I think the use of it for convenience, well, my hope would be that that would show up and people would recognize that and think of that piece of content or whatever output and then the brand as being cheap. But if you think about it from a kind of infrastructural perspective and think about how it can be used in order to facilitate, interesting experiences, a production of interesting experiences, et cetera, then I think, there's merit in that.
I think to build upon that and kind of to go back to what I was speaking about at the start with like the polls and the horseshoe theory, I think it's about like really knowing what you're trying to hit. So if it's about human connection and being very raw and being very real and being IRL, then do that. And if it's about being fantastical and otherworldly and imaginative and explorative, then maybe that's a place that AI does have a very strong foothold in. But I think it's about like knowing what extremity you might be trying to connect on and activating upon that. I think when you want to be human, but you're using loads of tech to do it, that's definitely when it falls into that middle, soupy, sloppy space that I think it just doesn't connect with anyone.
And to build on that, it feels to me that basically it says don't be opportunistic with AI just because your competition or cross industries is doing it. Just do it for the sake of doing it. If it doesn't bring added value and real meaning to your brand, to your consumers, to your fandom, and where you're trying to go and achieve and how you're trying to grow with your consumers, don't try to jump on the wagon just because. Have a clear goal or a few steps in the journey that you are embarking upon.
Daniel, Rihanna, Ella, thank you so much for coming to speak
Thank
with
you.
us
Thank you.
today. So thank you everyone as well. Are there any questions for Daniel, Rihanna, or Ella?
I'm curious, Daniel, maybe this is a good question for you since you're an academic. Where do you think people should be reading about AI? Like what texts or voices do you kind of look to? Because I think there's so much like thought leadership on LinkedIn about AI, but they don't really know what they're talking about. So I'm kind of curious as someone who's like studied it for a long time, what do you think people should look to?
I mentioned Kay Lauder McDowell. I think they did a series of essays looking like kind of outlined this notion of neural media I mean, they're interesting because they are, I guess, like theorists and artists, but they also run the art and AI research lab at Google in Silicon Valley. So, and they sort of are very embedded within the actual kind of mechanics and sort of workings of, you know, like, so I think they're really interesting, and they've also published a number of books writing with AI in various kind of ways. There's a really interesting book that's just come out called Exocapitalism that kind of proposes a new understanding of what capitalism is, which is very sort of algorithmic or sort of AI sort of connected in various ways, and how computational kind of thinking or computational logic is shaping how value is generated, I guess. And their proposition is that kind of it's operating almost indifferent to kind of human activity.
Horrifying.
Horrifying, yeah. But it is interesting in terms of like how so that's a useful way in terms of like interesting kind of, yeah. Who else I think that could be interesting as a...
Both those writers have been on Little Internet's podcast.
On
so
New
I feel
Models,
like,
yeah.
on New Models.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a kind of podcast or whatever, like New Models is really interesting in terms of this intercultural context. Yeah, I think also, I mean, again, on a kind of cultural context, maybe the writer Alex Kecho is really interesting in relation to sort of actually how it connects or how it kind of impacts human subjectivity and identities and things like that. So yeah, so that would be my, yeah.
Ella, you said something earlier on about data rich and insight poor, which is a phrase that I've used quite a lot. I was wondering if any of you, but especially you, had any examples of how brands are using kind of innovation and technology to better capture data signals to aid their understanding of local trends in the context of today, local trends and culture. And Rihanna, you gave a lovely example, and I therefore wondered if you all agreed, is that maybe the role of AI? So behind the scenes, but, you know, to Karen's question a little later on, what's the role of AI here? It sort of feels like that might be it. And I wondered if you had any other examples of really aiding our insight and capturing those signals that we maybe struggle with.
We've built a system of using conversational tools to gather insights at scale, and it's something that we've found to work incredibly well. And what we've done is we've built a system where you're able to send out what feels like hyper-personalized messages to the audience that you're trying to gain insights from, and they feel as if they're having a one-to-one conversation through WhatsApp, so people can do it at home in their own time. We also set them like creative tasks, so it might be like if you're in Tokyo, go out and take pictures of how, I don't know, the sneakers that you're seeing on the streets, or how pant legs are changing, or whatever it might be. And then we collect all of that and distill it and synthesize it and understand it. Not in the pursuit of speeding up a trend cycle even further, but in pursuit of trying to really allow brands to do the things that are going to make the biggest impact and help change and shape culture in the way that people actually want. So, yeah, I think it's a really interesting, an interesting change in the insight space, which has felt very stale for a very long time, and something that we found particularly like really connects with early adopters that certainly don't want to go on like an online forum or write a diary. They're on their phones. They're just out on the street and they can send back voice notes and all of this. So yeah, I'm biased, but I think it's a really amazing way of gathering insights at scale.
So trying to answer your question about data rich but insight poor, you have a team of people then completely deciphering, decoding, re-encoding. So it's not yet very...
It's not like
so
pure...
there you go.
Very human in the loop,
yes.
Driven by humans. We like are kind of orchestrating everything in the background and then reading everything, distilling it.
And I think you have media agencies, but also brands trying to create their own proprietary AI that would do all the work, but we're still far from that. Despite all the redundancies, and then calling on freelancers, oh, by the way, can you do that? It's still very human heavy and human driven in terms of deciphering all these insights for now.
Yeah, I mean, the data itself also, it really depends on the context of the data, because there was a really interesting study that was just done across Harvard and Yale and Bard, I believe, where they created digital twins of hundreds of people. It was all over the news just recently, because they're really trying to create these sort of synthetic, AI research subjects that they could use instead of having to go out and actually speak to people. I know, sounds kind of grim, right? That's the point. That's what they're trying. I know. Me too. By the way, we do have an AI tool, but we're not doing that. The digital twins just were not human because there's something missing in the data. There is sort of their AI versions and the digital twins were more rational, were more compassionate when asked about compassionate causes. Like the irrationality of human behavior is very difficult to actually capture and in a sort of data format. They're sort of the things that spill over the edges of humanity that we sort of can't yet capture, that we may be able to observe if we're saying, hey, why are all these pant legs looking like that in Tokyo, like you mentioned? So I think it's really, really interesting to think about. There's still so much that we don't know and still so much at that bleeding edge that will sit outside of AI, but that we, I guess, just need to keep fighting to get there somehow.
I feel like now with like ChatGPT updates, it's also where it's starting to like learn your behaviors and your personality. It's constantly like saying back to me, oh, like this is you, and I'm like, you don't know me.
Yeah, I get that too. It's like
and it gets it wrong a lot.
Oh,
like, yeah. It kind of it clearly is telling me an answer that it thinks that I want, because that's the pieces of the puzzle of me it's put together. And I'm like, no, I actually wanted something totally different. So yeah, it's limited, I guess.
I was just going to say, I think that may be also like a really, like creatively, I think that will be a really interesting space or like tension between these systems that can sort of make very like predictions about your behavior or your wants or needs or whatever, and the kind of at points that being correct and that being kind of unsettling to some degree, and then also these points where it gets it wrong, and also our resistance to being fully predictable, and sort of what that actually produces. I guess like the irrationality, like I can perceive a sort of point where irrationality itself becomes like almost like a sort of commodity or something that is valued in some way. And like, so what kind of behavior would that facilitate? I don't know what that would be, but I mean, it could be interesting, it could be horrific, right?
Yeah, that could be the next counterculture, anti-clankerism.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Where there's a counterculture of trying not to be predicted by AI.
Yeah. And so...
Spelling mistake.
True, yeah, absolutely.
Almost like
yeah.
indication the human actually wrote it.
Yeah, so I think that is an interesting, like interesting tension about this kind of like, about sort of a system understanding you and actually in that being correct, and you going like, oh fuck, like am I as predictable as the system thinks I am, etc., etc., and then like trying to respond to that and sort of like having some kind of resistance. I think this is interesting as a space.
Fantastic question, and to be continued, because I feel like we sort of it's very hard to answer as well. Daniel, Rihanna, Ella, thank you so much and for your time.
Thank you.